As we get into the Word of God, recently, I just want to point out something. Donald Trump recently picked he's a baby boomer, Donald Trump is, and he picked J.D. Vance to be his running mate, and J.D. Vance is a millennial. And so basically, they skipped my generation, Generation X. They skipped Gen X, and I just want to say, this is not the first time Gen X has been left out. It's not the first time. For instance, those of you who are millennials and Gen Z and whatever it is that's coming after that, you guys get to have, and baby boomers did too, you guys get to have red M&Ms. We did not when we were kids. We didn't have red M&Ms because the government decided that the dye they used for the red M&M caused cancer, so they outlawed it. Hershey's, who makes M&Ms, they quit putting red M&Ms in their packages. So all of you guys have grown up or been around red M&Ms. Gen X, we didn't have any when we were kids. We had to wait around until they figured out that, oh, maybe we were wrong. Maybe it doesn't cause cancer. So now you get red M&Ms. You got them before, you got them after. Gen X gets left out. It's not the only time. I mean, when I was growing up, they said that butter and red meat and cheese and eggs, they cause high levels of cholesterol and heart disease. And so they told us to quit eating all that and start eating more carbohydrates. Well, you know what happens if you eat more carbohydrates, but that's what they said back in the day. And when I was growing up, you weren't supposed to eat so many eggs and not so much red meat, and kind of be easy on the cheese and all of those kinds of things in the butter, So they came up with new things to replace real butter. They replaced it with some concoction called margarine. And as it turns out, now that we've gotten to this point in life, they figured out, that article came out in 2015 and said, oh, by the way, we actually went back and looked at the science, and butter's not really bad for you. And neither is red meat, and neither are eggs. In fact, they were kind of wrong when they said that you need to limit these things. And so now, as they've studied more, the science has changed, because it's not really the science that changed, it was just our understanding of it. And so now they realize that actually butter is much better for you than this concoction called margarine. Much better for you than that. And that's kind of what happens in life and in science. We think one thing is right, and then a few years later we think, oh my goodness, we got that one wrong, and we have to change everything. That's not just true when it comes to like normal scientific stuff. That's true in everything. That's true when it comes to creation science. It's true when it comes to biblical interpretation. There are things that we used to believe, things that we used to propose, that today has changed because they've changed ideas. They used to think that one way to explain Noah's flood was that the earth was enveloped by a canopy of water vapor, and that for some reason that water vapor just condensed and began to rain on the earth and it flooded everything. That was one of the main theories in creation science for how the flood would have happened. And most people in creation science who are real scientists, most of them are real scientists, they don't accept that particular idea anymore. It doesn't really work. It doesn't really hold up. And there's been times when our Bible interpretations have changed over time as we've learned more about the Bible and as we've studied more about the Bible. And I would imagine even for you as an individual, there are things that as you follow God that God teaches you, and your belief today might not be exactly the same as it was 20 years ago, because you've learned a lot. And there are and will be debates about all these kinds of issues, especially the ones that we see in Genesis chapter 1. When it comes to the creation, when it comes to all the science and the understanding of how God may have done this or that, or how the universe came to be. There's been all of these kinds of things, and yet in the midst of all of this, we have quite often seen some pretty harsh debates. And yet in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, Paul writes this, and it's a verse that, it means, it's pretty powerful. Paul says, ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and His divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things that He has made. So they are without excuse. Talking about us. Talking about people in general. That we are without excuse when it comes to God because God has surrounded us with His creation. And even though we can't see God, we can see the things that He's made. And we can see His eternal power and His divine nature. Paul said that the creation, all of the things that God has surrounded us with in the universe, are a sign of God's handiwork, or a sign of God. And the creation testifies about God and tells us about God. And it doesn't matter what language you speak. And it doesn't matter what part of the planet that you're on. You're still surrounded by this testimony of God Himself. And yet we don't agree. Or we don't always figure things out. So we look at a verse like that and we wonder, what does it mean exactly that we can understand and see God? What are we supposed to take from the creation? What are we supposed to understand? Ken Hovind was a famous creationist. You may have heard of him. He was really big for a long while, especially when I was a kid and we couldn't eat red M&Ms. And so we were watching Ken Hovind. But Ken Hovind was a really famous creationist. His name was Dr. Dino. That's what they called him. And he wrote a lot of books, and he was a super great debater. And you can still get on YouTube and you can see clips of him debating people on creation and evolution, or on the existence of God and atheism and things like that. And so Ken was pretty popular. And Ken also went to prison for 9 years because of tax evasion type things. And when that happened, that was kind of disconcerting, because you think, here's this good Christian man, and here's this great debater, and he went to prison, and that's not a good look for a Christian, you wouldn't think, for tax evasion. If you go to prison because you're preaching Jesus, that's good. If you go to prison because you're not paying your taxes, that's bad. And so I just kind of, that sort of struck me. And I've been around a lot of creationists, and I've pursued those kinds of issues and that kind of stuff. It's always been really interesting to me. And I've been around some creation guys. And when I was around some creation guys, one time I took the opportunity to say, what happened with Ken? What was the deal? Because the people I were talking to knew Ken. They knew him personally. And I said, well, what was up with the whole going to prison thing for taxes? And I asked a friend, and he said, well, you got to understand something about Ken. Ken's really stubborn. He's really stubborn. And he says, and that works really well for you when you're in a debate. When you're stubborn in a debate, that's going to make you a good debater. Doesn't work so well when you're arguing with the IRS. And it's probably true. I get it. And Ken, if you're watching, I wish you well. I hope everything's good now, because I think all that's in the past now. But it does make me think that sometimes we are good at being debaters. And we are good at being stubborn, especially when it comes to creation, especially when it comes to Genesis. When maybe the right thing for us to do is to come at Genesis and look at God's creation, and instead of trying to always just win the argument, but to come to His creation with the heart of a child, in wonder, in awe, and willingness to learn. I think when we come to the creation and we come to what God has surrounded us with just the heart of a child, that's when we're doing it right. Jesus said something about this once. He said in Matthew chapter 18, verse 3 and 4, He said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And that's a serious thing to think about. He says, unless we become like little children, we won't even enter the kingdom of heaven. He says in the next verse, whoever becomes humble like this child, he had a child in front of him when he was saying this. He says, whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Those verses kind of mean a lot to me when it comes to this particular subject, because I have not preached on Genesis, just straight up on Genesis chapter 1, in a long time, for fear of offending people that are in the audience. Because I may not and probably won't, and really, honestly, you should probably disagree with me, but it is really hard to say something that everybody agrees with when it comes to Genesis chapter 1 and creation. So I was nervous even to come forward today and to preach on this particular chapter and to do something in detail. I'm pretty nervous, but I think these verses are telling us something. I think they're telling us it's not about whoever is the greatest debater. It's about having the heart of a child when we come to God's creation and just being in awe of what He's surrounded us with and letting our Father, letting God just speak to us from His creation and learning from Him. And we don't have to have it all figured out. It's okay if we're not really sure what we think about this particular aspect or that one, but to just let God teach us and speak to us from His creation. To just come to Him with the heart of a child. I think sometimes we're better at having the heart of a teenager, where we've got it figured out. And then you get older and you get humbled again. I think we're better sometimes at having the heart of a debater, where we just want to win the argument. But when we approach Genesis with the heart of a child, I think we find joy, and I think we're a better witness to the world. I think we're a better witness when they just see people that love God and love what He's made. So I just want to talk about what it means to have the heart of a child. And the first one is this. I think when you have the heart of a child, you have a little bit of awe and curiosity. You're not sure how it works, but it looks really cool. And I really believe that God wanted us to have awe and curiosity. And I really believe that God made a point of making sure that you and I could see His creation. And some creationist guys pointed this out to me one time, and I was kind of amazed when I thought about it, because they were right, I think. There's something about the way that God made the universe and where He's put us in it, that it just seems like that God wanted us to be able to see it all. Wanted us to be able to view it all and to be in awe of it. You know, right now the earth is occupying what they call a particularly empty piece of space. We're sort of in a part of space where there's not a lot of dust and there's not a lot of debris and there's not a lot of things flying at us. They think that the earth is actually in the wash of a bubble from a leftover shockwave of a supernova that took place, however many years ago they think it took place. That we're in a part of space that just doesn't have as much danger to it, doesn't have as much debris to it as normal. And we even got a big planet out there called Jupiter that keeps sucking all the big stuff away from us to keep us safe. That helps too. There's just interesting that we're in a good spot. That not only are we safe, but we're not surrounded by so much debris and so much dust that it blocks our view. And we're in a spiral galaxy. And one nice thing about a spiral galaxy is it's shaped like a wheel, which means that if you look right down the wheel, it's going to get in the way. But you can look everywhere else. If we were in a galaxy shaped like a ball, we might be surrounded by the galaxy. We might not be able to see the rest of the universe, but we are in the perfect kind of galaxy if we really wanted to see the rest of the universe. And we're not in the middle of that galaxy either, where if we were in the middle of our galaxy, we'd be surrounded by more stars and more dust and more debris, and it would be very difficult to see. It would be very difficult to have a day and a night because we'd be so much closer to light sources. But we're out here on one of the arms in an empty piece of space in a spiral galaxy so that we can see the rest of the universe. It would be hard to do any better than where we are and to be able to see everything that God has made. And not only are we in the right place when it comes to the galaxy, but our moon is the perfect size so that every now and then, when it gets in between us and the sun, it covers the surface of the sun. So if you were in that last total eclipse, and I traveled down the West Plains so I could be in it, when the moon completely covered the sun, you could take the glasses off. In fact, you needed to, because you couldn't see otherwise. Take the glasses off, you can look with the naked eye, because the really bright part of the sun has been covered. The moon's the perfect size for that. But even better, when the moon covers the sun like that, you can see the corona, which you can't see otherwise because it's too bright. And we might never have seen the corona. or learned about those sorts of things if the moon hadn't been the perfect size. And you can dig into details like that, and from one thing after another, it's like this universe was designed just for you, just for humanity to be able to see God. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the Bible says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Verse 2, "Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the surface of the watery depths, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters." We're 2 verses into the Bible at that point, and we're already into trying to win the debate arguments. In the early 1900s especially, it was popular to look at this verse here and say there was a gap of time in between verse 1 and verse 2. The idea was that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but something had happened. There was a gap of time in between this verse and the next verse. And that in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, He put dinosaurs on the earth. That the whole earth was flourishing for millions of years. And then Satan rebelled. And when Satan rebelled, and the Bible doesn't tell us anything about Satan's rebellion. I mean, he's just there. He's already a bad guy in Genesis chapter 3. But they would read that and they speculated. The gap theory said that Satan had rebelled, had destroyed the earth. And so when you get to verse 2, that we should translate it by saying, "And the earth became formless and empty, and darkness covered the surface of the watery depths, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters." You see, the earth is already there, and it's already covered by water. And the idea was that it had flooded, it had been destroyed. When God had first created it, it had been destroyed, and there was a gap of time, and that's when the dinosaurs lived. That was called, it is called today, the gap theory. And it was really, really popular at the time. The grammar doesn't really work, though. That's one of those things that has changed over the years as we've learned more about how Hebrew works and how the language works. And that it's not really, it's not something that works very well. For instance, on this particular thing, we can look in Jonah chapter 3, and it says, Jonah got up and went to Nineveh according to the Lord's command. And then it says, now Nineveh was this really big city, was an extremely great city, a 3-day walk. And so He's not telling you the next thing that happened, He's just adding description. He's telling you what Nineveh was like that Jonah was getting ready to go into. That's the exact same grammar, the same sentence construction that you run into in Genesis. So Genesis says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was. It's the same sort of structure, so it's not like one thing happened and then the next thing happened. It's just adding description. And so the gap theory it's no longer popular. But we've debated those kinds of things. And when the story starts, in the very beginning, when the story begins, it says in Genesis chapter 1, if I can get back to it there. In Genesis chapter 1, it says, almost there. There we go. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The story starts with the earth in place. You read that next verse, the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the surface of the watery depths. It was there. It was featureless. It was dark. But it was empty. God hadn't done anything yet. He hadn't filled it all yet. He's getting ready to do that. You might ask yourself, how long had the heavens and the earth been empty before God said, "Let there be light"? And the answer is, we don't know. No idea. The Bible doesn't say. What it does say is that at a time when everything was dead and empty, when there was nothing, God was just getting started. And God took something that was as of yet dead and He brought it to life. And all of the beauty that we see in the universe and all of the things that God has made on this earth and all of the picturesque, perfect scenes that God created on this planet, that He brought that to life from something that was dead and that was dark and that was empty. We can see that God is an artist. We can see His eternal power. We can see His divine nature. And we can know that this life is not just all that there is, that we're not just by ourselves, but we are surrounded by beauty. We're surrounded by awesome things. We're surrounded by all of this creation, and we can look to God, and we can see that there are things in this world that really do have meaning and really do have beauty and aren't hopeless and aren't meaningless. So much of the rest of the world goes through life without seeing God as present in their world and as present in their life. But when you go through, you're surrounded by all the signs of His creation, and you can know that you're not alone. And you can know that there is real meaning. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. In verse 4, it says, "And God saw the light was good, and He separated the light from darkness." And in verse 5, God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening and morning the first day. What this story tells us is that God established the operation of day and night. He established order. He set things in motion. He has the power to bring what's dead to life, to bring order out of disorder. God can do all of these things, and you and I are not alone. I got a friend of mine who is good at carpentry. He's extremely good at carpentry. His name is Mark Wilbanks, and at a church in Mountain View, we had a baptistry, and we had a baptistry changing area, and it was crazy bad in there. I mean, it was just like some walls with a couple of hinges, just like some makeshift things that were sort of thrown up, and they're sort of not even straight, and they're kind of leaning. You'd be afraid if you went behind them to go change to get baptized that it might fall on you, while you're doing that. And besides that, it's just got hinges, and so it's not really the most private thing. You got that long line down the middle of it where you can kind of see right through. And so we walked in, and when we first got there, and we were getting started as a church, and one of the things that we talked about in board meeting was, can we have some like real changing areas? There's enough room in that room. Can we just build some changing areas in there? And Mark said he thought that was a good idea. And so Mark goes in there and builds 2 changing areas. And Mark, there's a few of you guys who can do what Mark does. There's a few of you in here, who do that kind of woodworking. When he got done, we had 2 changing areas. They had doors that would lock. They had their own electricity, so you could turn on the light in there. You had full-length mirror if you wanted to see, get dressed, do your hair. We had shelves for towels, and we had shelves for changes of clothes, and we had a chair, and we had things to hang, with hangers and stuff like that. It was better than the one at Walmart. It was way better than that. It was great. We could have multiple people who could get baptized. And once we figured out that he could do that sort of thing, then we started asking Mark for all kinds of things. As soon as we found out he could just create whatever we wanted, all we had to do was give him an idea, then he was the go-to guy. And let me tell you, we've got a God who can make things that's just amazing. We got a God who can create beauty. We got a God who's an artist who creates variety. We have a God who's really, he's into detail. He's made stuff so small we can't see it. He's made stuff so big it's frightening to look at. And to think about. And we see this God. And let me tell you, if you've got a God like that, why don't you go to Him for everything? If He can do all that, He can handle your life. He can answer your prayer. And when this life is done, He's got you. It's okay. Well, that's an amazing hope that we have because we can see God's divine power surrounding us. We need to have that awe. We need to have that joy of seeing His creation. And another thing we need to have, humility and willingness to learn. When I started studying this particular subject about Genesis and creation and evolution and all of those kinds of things, I was an old earth guy. I believed that the earth had been around for probably millions of years, and I believe that fit with the Bible, and you can still look at the Bible, and you can still fit that with the Bible. But a lot of people looked at the earth as being very young, and there's this huge debate in church. One of the reasons why I'm always scared to bring this up in a sermon is because there's this huge debate that we have divided over, called each other sinners, and said that if you disagree, you don't believe the Scripture. And when it comes to whether the earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, or whether the earth is billions of years old. When I was an old earth guy, our youth minister got us to bring a creationist to come and speak. Creationist is a good friend of mine now, and he came to speak, and he was a young earth guy. He believed the earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, and he taught a lot, and he had PhDs and all those kinds of things, and he convinced me. And for quite some time, I was a young earth guy, and I believe the earth was young, and there really are some really good arguments on both sides, and some good science on both sides, and some good Bible interpretation on both sides. And I firmly believe that if the Bible is true, then as we research and as we learn, the Bible will kind of match up with those kinds of things, because I believe the Bible is true. So I believe that as we research and as we learn, it'll get more like the Bible. I think we've seen that already. They used to think that the universe had always existed, but they don't think that anymore. Now they believe in the Big Bang Theory. And in the Big Bang Theory, they believe that there was a time when there was nothing, and then nothing exploded. And, and it became the universe. Now, that might seem crazy to you, but that was a really good news. To have that moment where we really didn't have anything, and then to go from not having anything to having a whole lot of stuff, that fit Genesis, where God said, "Let there be light," and bang, there was light. That fit Genesis a little bit more, and I really believe that the more we understand things, the more we understand the Bible, and the more we understand the universe, that those kinds of things will come together. If we're humble enough to change our opinion when we're wrong, or when we're shown to be wrong. Whether that means we change a scientific theory because it just doesn't add up, or we change our Bible or biblical interpretation because it doesn't add up. When we have the heart of a child, we're still learning. When we have the heart of a child, we're still teachable. When we have the heart of a child, God can still show us where we're wrong. And that's so important when it comes to following Him. That we don't dig down into our opinions so deeply and so much that God can't teach us anymore. And Genesis, these days, I see the poetry of Genesis chapter 1 that I didn't see before. I see the poetry of it. I see how it was written. And I see how it uses terminology from ancient Israel. For instance, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 6, the Bible says, "And God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And so God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. Now, your particular version of the Bible might say dome. It might say firmament if you got the King James. It might say vault if you got the New International Version. It might say expanse if you've got several of the others, like the English Standard Version or the New American Standard. That's because that particular word we kind of wrestle with. Expanse sounds more like the sky, because that's what this is talking about. It's talking about the sky. It's talking about what you see when you're standing on the ground and you look up. And in ancient times, they believed that it was, and that word literally means a canopy. They understood it that way because they'd never shot anything up into the sky like that. They didn't have the telescopes that we have. And so they understood it as a dome, as a vault, as a canopy. That's what the word they would use, because that's how they understood it. But he's not trying to argue with us here in these verses that it's a dome or a canopy. He's trying to tell us something very, very, very basic. God made it. You would describe it differently. You might use the word expanse. You might use the word atmosphere. You might use the word deep space, which is actually 2 words. You might do all those things because you're coming at it from a different point of view. You're coming at it with a different perspective. But you would still mean the same thing. God made it. God made it. God called the dome sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. We go on, it says in verse 16, God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. He says in verse 17, and God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. Because that's what it looked like. And that's how the ancient people understood it. And when we look at this, we wouldn't describe it the same way. But when they wrote this, they used their own language. They wrote it in Hebrew. They described it in their own terms. How else were they going to describe it? But the Bible isn't trying to get us to believe in a dome. It's telling us that God created the sky up there and everything in that sky that we see when we look up. And so these days, when I read Genesis chapter 1, I can see the poetry. I can see some of the context. I can understand their way of writing it. And so today, I'm back to being more of that older earth guy. But if the Lord made it in 10,000 years, I'm good with that. If He made it in several billion, I'm good with that. I'm just glad He made it. And I'm still learning. And if you've ever run into a verse of the Bible that makes no sense, if you've ever just been struggling and wrestling with anything about God or anything about Jesus that you just don't quite get, answers to big questions that don't really quite seem clear, let me just tell you something. It's okay to not be sure yet. It's okay to just be a child in our attitude and in our heart. And to just let God teach us. And let God put us where He wants to be. In these days, we say that truth is all relative. And somebody has a truth for them, but I might have a different truth. The Bible says, no, there's actual truth as well. There's real truth. There's a real reality. There's real history. There's a real future. And it's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out. But if you have the heart of a child and you let God teach you, if you let God guide you, if you have that humility, He'll lead you the right way. In my garden at home, we put in 2 raised gardens at home. They're pretty decent size, about 4 by 8 or so, and pretty deep. And on one of them, we thought we didn't plant very much. In fact, we worried that we didn't plant very much. We had 3 cucumber plants, and then we planted 1 row of beans and green beans. And then, that we thought, okay, we'll see what happens. Let me tell you, those guys are like Republicans and Democrats right now. They are adding. I did not know what we had just done, but we had planted 3 cucumber plants next to a row of beans, and those babies have been going to war ever since. You should see it right now. That whole thing is just covered with greenery, and they send out these little stalks, and they grab onto things. The cucumbers do it, and so do the beans. And just until last week, they were doing it to each other. If you'd have gone out and seen my garden, it was pretty much this. I mean, that's what they were doing. They were trying to choke each other apart. We had to separate them, told them to be nice to each other. But let me tell you, sometimes when it comes to opinions on the Bible, Christians get the same way. We try to choke each other out. We get at each other's throats a little bit. It's even when it comes to Genesis. But in Acts chapter 15, they had some arguments as well. They had some arguments over what did it take to be saved? What are the important things? And they decided to let the brand new Christians know, here's some things we want you to know. They sent them a letter in Acts chapter 15, verse 28. Then this letter, it said, it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us, these are the Christians at Jerusalem, sending a letter to all the new guys, to impose on you no further burdens than these essentials. He says that you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, that you from blood and from whatever and what is strangled and from fornication, so sexual immorality. If you keep yourself from these, you'll do well. Farewell. It is absolutely incredible how few essentials that they gave them, and the essentials that they gave them weren't essential beliefs as much as they were essential behavior. Staying away from sin, staying away from idolatry. A lot of that has to do with idolatry. God had been working on those new Christians. The Holy Spirit had been doing miracles in their midst. But instead of telling them you have to believe everything the way that we believe on all these different lists of subjects, go to any church website and there'll be a statement of beliefs and there'll be a whole list of subjects. Now this is what we believe. But instead of putting that on other people, you know what they said? They said, watch how you behave. Watch what you worship. Good luck. You'll do well. They gave room for them to grow. They gave room for them to grow. And let me tell you, when you come to God and you come to the Bible with the heart of a child, God gives you room to grow. God God will teach you. He will lead you. And you don't have to know everything. You might walk into church and feel like everybody's, 3 grades ahead of you, and you're just trying to figure out where in the world Genesis is in this great big book. But that's okay, because God will teach you. If you come to God with the heart of a child, He leads us all in the right direction. And what a great God that is, who gives us room to grow. He puts light in our darkness, just like in this chapter. He puts light in our darkness. He starts separating this and separating that. He pulls this up and pushes that down. He grows this and He sets something else in place. God does all these things. He didn't just do it in the past, but He does it in our life. And in the end, when He finishes in Revelation chapter 1, He'll form you in His image. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. It's okay if you don't. Scientists thought red M&Ms were bad, and I missed out on them for a long time. But when you come to God, He'll lead you in the right direction. You just need to have that awe, that wonder, that humility, that willingness to learn.